Not all heroes wear capes. In fact, not all heroes are honest people. In 1941, during the Second World War, a Spanish chicken farmer by the name of Juan Pujol Garcia went to the British embassy in Madrid, offering to spy on the Germans. Spain had remained officially neutral during the war, although its dictator, Francisco Franco, was friendly to Hitler. Pujol hated fascism. He hated his country's fascist government, he hated the Nazi occupation of Europe, and he wanted to fight them. Turns out it's kind of hard to get a job as a spy when the only thing on your resume is raising chickens. He was rejected. Not to be deterred, Pujol went to the German embassy and offered to spy for the Germans. The Germans were initially skeptical, but Pujol managed to convince them to take him on. He was transferred to Portugal, where, without actually traveling to Britain, managed to convince his German spy handlers that he had arrived in Britain. This was before the days of Wikipedia and the internet, where the only way to get information was to find whatever available reading material was. Brochures, magazines, newspapers. And you could usually tell when someone hasn't actually been to a place. Still, the deception worked, and the British were so impressed by Pujol's abilities that they offered to take him on as a double agent, a spy who pretended to work for the Germans while secretly working for the British. Under the British codename Garbo, Pujol became an instrumental part in a mass deception campaign called the Double Cross System. The premise of the Double Cross System was that instead of executing captured spies, you give them a chance to live, provided they send back what you tell them to send. The British intelligence carefully concocted reports that were believable enough to not tip off the Germans, but were also carefully designed not to give too much of the game away. These reports sounded true, but were either false, trivial, or as conveniently sent too late to be useful. Soon, Pujol was running a network of people, alive, dead, and imaginary, and had an answer for everything the Germans wanted to know. Some German spies that opted to die for the fatherland had their identities assumed by Pujol, who continued to transmit under their code names, fooling the Germans into thinking they were still alive. He even birthed over the airwaves 27 imaginary agents, each with their own story and character. Talk about a guy who had a lot of invisible friends. And dead friends. And the Germans were none the wiser. Everything Pujol sent back to the Germans was considered high-priority communication for Berlin. He was even awarded the Iron Cross by Hitler. This, despite the fact that he was lying to the Nazis the whole time. But perhaps Pujol's greatest achievement was with the D-Day invasion. The Germans knew that eventually the Allies would invade Europe to try to liberate it, but they didn't know exactly where and when. Pujol convinced the Germans that the attack would happen at Calais, when in fact it would happen farther west at Normandy. Combined with the larger deception campaign that involved faked boats and inflatable tanks, it convinced the Germans to keep the army at Calais, leaving Normandy open for attack. Even after the initial invasion, Pujol kept up the deception to keep the Germans from scrambling their armies. In fact, Hitler was so convinced that the invasion would happen through Calais that he refused to believe initial reports from Normandy. By the time the Germans realized the truth, it was too late. The Allies had a strong foothold in France and were well on their way to liberating Europe. Pujol was not a trained spy. He was a chicken farmer with no experience in spying or counter-espionage. And yet he was able to fool the German high command to such a degree that throughout the war, the Germans never realized they had been duped. Pujol received the Order of the British Empire from King George VI in 1944, giving him the rare honor of having been decorated by both sides. What happened after the war is a little humbling. Pujol shied away from the limelight and moved to South America under anonymity, where he lived a very quiet life, never talking about his wartime accomplishments. His story was never shared during wartime for national security. He was a spy, after all. His story wasn't told until the 1980s, when his autobiography was finally published. He died in Caracas in 1988, a decorated war hero. And a liar. Actually, Pujol's story fascinates me because it's a story of a war hero, but not the kind you expect. He helped the war effort, not through fighting in battle, or donating materials, or manufacturing weapons, or raising war bonds, but from being a con man. And despite all of that, he never sought attention for his work. The history books may be written by the victors, but actual history is made by the people backstage. And hey, if you're a chicken farmer, you might be the next Pujol, ready to fight totalitarianism. Future Enoch, I'll see you next week.